Welcome to this special edition of Pharma Drama, the show where we look at the science of healthcare and healthcare products. Today we're in my laboratory, and the reason is because I want to explain to you the basic principles of a glass transition, and in order to do that I need a couple of amorphous materials and some liquid nitrogen, and I can't do that at home. So if you're ready to find out what a glass transition is, get yourself a drink. I'm not allowed to have one because I'm in a laboratory, but you can. Sit back, relax, and let's make a start. A glass transition is something that applies to amorphous materials. So in order to show you a glass transition, I need some amorphous materials, and I have two in front of me. Starting with this rubber band. If I said to you, is this a solid, a liquid, or a gas? I hope you'd say to me, it's a solid, and you'd be right. But it's a special kind of solid because it's an amorphous solid. Amorphous materials, let me remind you, are things that have the viscosity of a solid but the structure of a liquid. That means the molecules in amorphous materials are randomly aligned. And in this case, it means that our rubber band is relatively able to move if I apply a force to it. So we say this is a rubbery material. Most of the amorphous materials that we deal with in the pharmacy world are rubbery solids like this. That means if we apply a force to those materials, the molecules are going to move. As we cool a rubbery material down in temperature, the molecules have less ability to move. And there becomes a special temperature, which is different for each amorphous material, where the molecules essentially become frozen. Have to be a little bit careful with the word frozen, but in this instance I mean if we apply a force to a material, once it's gone through its glass transition temperature, the molecules are no longer able to move. Okay? So the easiest way I can demonstrate that is to take this rubber band and drop it below its glass transition temperature. And the easiest way for me to do that is with this vat of liquid nitrogen. So, before the rubber band goes into liquid nitrogen, I think you can see it's got a lot of mobility as I apply a force to it. If we put it into liquid nitrogen, and let me remind you, liquid nitrogen is minus 196 degrees centigrade, that's going to drop the temperature of the rubber band quite significantly. In fact, it's going to drop it below its glass transition temperature. So when we take the rubber band out of the liquid nitrogen, it's essentially frozen. I hope you can see that the rubber band is now pointing towards the ceiling because it's below its glass transition temperature and it's a brittle solid. As it warms up, however, the molecules regain their ability to move and the rubber band goes back to being a rubbery solid. Hope that makes sense. Let me do that one more time. So above its glass transition temperature, rubbery solid, into liquid nitrogen for a bit, drop it below its glass transition temperature, it becomes a brittle solid, and then as it warms back up to room temperature, it will go through its glass transition temperature and revert back to being a rubbery solid again. Okay, so that's example number one. Now you might say to me, why are there a series of jelly babies on the table? And the answer is that jelly babies are also a really good way of demonstrating glass transition. Now if I pick one, it happens to be orange, I can see at the front here. A jelly baby is essentially sugar. Okay? That's why your mum was never too happy with you eating them as a child. If we take the jelly baby and we take this big hammer and we hit the jelly baby, what will happen is not very much at all. And the reason is because the molecules in my jelly baby are able to move. It's a rubbery amorphous material. So when the hammer comes down and hits the jelly baby, that energy which the hammer is supplying, the molecules can absorb that energy and move, and the jelly baby is essentially okay. Please don't try this trick with any of your friends because it doesn't work very well on human beings. Now the question is, what happens to the jelly baby if we then drop it below its glass transition temperature such that it becomes a brittle solid. It should come as no surprise to you to know that in order to do that, we have to put the jelly baby into liquid nitrogen for a bit. That's going to lower the temperature of the jelly baby so it's below its glass transition temperature. So when we take it out, it is now a brittle solid, and if I hit it with the hammer, now, and I've got a bit of that inside my t-shirt, now the molecules are frozen together because it's a brittle solid. When the hammer comes down, those molecules can no longer move to absorb that energy. The energy, therefore, explosively blows the jelly baby apart. Right, I hope that's helped. 2 examples of amorphous materials, them going through their glass transition temperature. If it did, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel. If not, I'm going to go and clean up the laboratory so I don't get told off, and I'll see you again soon.